Ross Coleman, you're very welcome, and Anna-Clare McGarvey, you're very welcome, and you're both well at the end of your masters now in UCD. So tell us a little bit about that masters before we talk about all things Irish. Whichever one of you would like to start first, you're very welcome.
What do you think, Ross? Would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. So the masters that Anna-Clare and I are doing is called Scríb agus Omersoid Nagwa. So that means writing and communication in Irish, and the content of the course is quite broad. So we covered translation, grammar, also we do a module on the Irish language media, and as well as that we do a module on writing in the Irish language. So I suppose it's quite broad, but on the whole, Anna-Clare and I have decided to specialize in translation.
And I was just, that's another thing. So tell us about translation, because translation is a tricky thing to do. So as you know, well, you may know, that Tribes Press is the only multilingual book publisher in Ireland. And so we have quite a lot of experience around translation. And the one thing that everybody needs to remember when translating, that Google Translate won't work. That translation is more than just words. It's about the colloquial terms that are used in certain parts of the world. It's about the theme of a book, the flow of a book, in terms of literature. Anna-Clare, would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it is in our course we call it a carriage, so a craft, and it is a craft. It's not just a sense of looking up a word in the dictionary and it's a like for like comparison. You have to understand both languages inside out, because with languages comes a way of thinking and a way of understanding the world around you as well. And then within that, you have different language registers as well. So what's appropriate for adults, teenagers, children, or for an official publication or for creative writing as well. So mostly I think translators specialize for good reason, because it's so broad. But it's fantastic. I personally really enjoy it, because I love the challenges of seeing what's possible and what's not possible, and how to get around, for example, if a phrase or concept doesn't exist in your target language, what do you do then? So there's opportunity to be very creative with it as well.
I'm just wondering too about in Ireland, the Irish language is a tricky one, because we go to school and we start learning the Irish language when we're 4 and we finish when we're 18. And people don't have the confidence when they finish school to speak the language. And what are your views on that?
I think the main reason why people aren't fluent after 14 years of language classes is because they don't have the opportunity to use the language outside the classroom, and it's not reflected in wider society. You know, it's like it's not as prevalent online. For example, one doesn't hear any pop music in Irish on the radio, and I feel because it's not as prevalent in Irish ever people don't have an opportunity to practice it and to actually use the language. And if
sorry, yeah. You know, when you're saying that, Ross, actually, and I don't know if you've been to Galway or the Gaeltacht in Galway here, Anna-Clare and Ross. If you go to the Aran Islands, the chances that when you speak Irish to the Aran Islanders, that they will speak Irish back to you is slim to none, because you're not a native speaker. So I have had that experience. And it can be quite difficult when you go into Gaeltacht areas. If you're not one of them, they're not as likely to speak the Irish language to you. And that's not for everybody, because there's some fantastic people in the Gaeltacht areas who really want to promote the Irish language and do a huge amount of work. But I've found that from time to time. You meet the people who just won't speak to you they'll speak back to you in English, or it's the rare people who will actually speak to you in Irish. Have any of you found that? Because this is something I have noticed from time to time when I tried to speak it in Aran Islands when I went out on a break for a day. Have you noticed any of this? Anna-Clare, have you noticed it? Have you ever been at a Gaeltacht or into a Gaeltacht area noticed that?
So just before we started recording here, I mentioned I actually am in a Gaeltacht at the minute, Cork, and I've had a very positive experience since I've come down. I've just been chatting away in Irish to everybody. Everyone's been chatting to me in Irish. Went down to the pub last night, and yeah, they spoke to me in English. I spoke back in Irish, and then they were like, "Grand," so continued on speaking in Irish. I have to say, I personally have had a very positive experience.
But I know that the difference between you and me is I know that you're studying it for the past while in college, and your proficiency level is very high, that you're fluent. So I know that I'm a little bit rusty. So if I'm a person who's done college, who's gone to school and finished secondary school, went on to college, didn't do it, once they left secondary school, they never spoke the Irish language, they want to get back into it, how do they go about it? Like, how do you go about it? Where do you start? Because where do people go? What do? They can start with courses, but there's only so much you can do. If you do a course for a semester or whatever at night, adult learning even, what do you do after that? Where are the places that I can go to speak Irish? Apart from, even if I was in Gaeltacht, where can I practice? Because I know if I'm proficient, if I'm exceptionally fluent, and I go anywhere, people will speak to me. But if I have drifted from the language because of just not meeting people speaking the language, how do I find my way back? Do you know anywhere I can go to find? Do you know what people do? What's our solution to the conundrum?
Well, I would say to anybody in that position, follow your interests, because whatever your interest is, it will be done in Irish. And what I mean by that is, for example, I'm an avid climber, hiker, a very outdoorsy person. So I actively went out and looked for walking groups who speak Irish. And there's na Knockadory in Bailaclia, and there's groups up in the north where I'm from as well, loads of them as well. And there's a variety of Gaeilge in a variety of levels in those groups as well. Another thing which I really enjoy doing is yoga. I find yoga classes online through Irish. Reading, I find reading classes online through Irish, like book clubs through Irish as well. So I would say, what are your interests? And then look up to see, is that being done in Irish anywhere? Because usually those groups attract learners, people at man level, air level, every kind of level.
Oh, that's a great idea. That's a great idea.
There's also the pop-up Gaeltachtaí. Now I know they're more concentrated in Dublin, but I think some pop up in Galway as well.
Yeah, I don't know. I know there was a pop-up one that I went to in Galway at one stage, but it was it wasn't something that actually drove my interest at all at the time. But I noticed what you're saying is quite good, because even I see my father, and he watches TG Cahir, and he watches Glór Tíre on TG Cahir. And before it comes on the television, he's speaking Irish, and when it's off the television, he's speaking Irish. And the next morning, at breakfast time, he's speaking Irish because he's talking about how much he loved Glór the night before and who he thinks is going to win the competition. All through Gaeilge. So I think you have hit the nail on the head in that. Yeah, if I find something that I'm interested in, there has to be somebody who's speaking the Irish language. There has to be Irish language groups that are doing it. So walkers clubs or whatever a person is interested in, swimming clubs or whatever. Yeah, that sounds like a plan. So if I want to return to language, I want to improve my language skills. That's the first path, I suppose, that I can take. You could possibly get a meetup app on your phone or something like that. I noticed for business in Galway, Galway Gaeilge is great for businesses in Galway in that every 2 weeks they have a Zoom meeting at the moment because everything's online, where they talk to people, where business people come together and they speak language with members of Galway Gaeilge team. And they just speak the Irish language. Their language proficiency improves as a result of that. And they're quite enjoyable groups because they're business people coming together who are interested in business and they're talking about business through Irish. So I can see now how that helps, when you're talking about the thing that you're interested in. Same with sport or TG Cahir. Connacht Rugby, all the Connacht Rugby games are televised through Gaeilge. So I can see now how we can improve our language. If we were to go one step further, because there's a massive number of Gaelscoileanna and Gael Colossi opening in Ireland. So lots of people who don't speak Irish in the home, who are Irish and went to school in Ireland, learned the language but don't particularly speak it because they've drifted from it, and they're not meeting people who are speaking the language. They are sending their children to all Irish primary schools and secondary schools, and more of these schools are opening. They're becoming very, very popular. There is some interest in the Irish language then. People want to get back into it. Do any of you know why? What is the driving force at the moment? Is it media marketing of Irish language?
I mean, I'm not an expert at this by any means, but I would say that people are now starting to realize that the Irish language is an important part of the culture, and I think they just simply want to with it and give it another go after having left school for 5 or 10 years. Now they feel ready to give it another shot.
And I notice many of the schools, Ross, are actually supporting parents in that they run night classes so if you want to help your child with their homework, they're running night classes to kind of bring you up to speed or to try and help you, refresh your Irish language for parents of children in Gaelscoileanna. So which I think is a really nice thing for the schools to be doing, because it just gives the parent who's a little bit rusty or lacking confidence. And I wonder, is it confidence that we're lacking more than anything else? Is that the reason why after 14 years of school that we don't speak the language? Are we lacking confidence?
I'd think so. I mean, as you alluded to earlier, arguably the attitude of some Irish speakers can be a bit off-putting, and sometimes, when I was younger, I felt that I needed to speak perfect, Irish for are going to take me seriously. And so, yeah, I do think that confidence has a big part to play in how people choose to use the Irish language. I don't know if Anna-Clare would agree with me there, but
Yeah, because I obviously have a different experience because I'm from the north. I didn't have to learn it at school; it was a choice. Um, so I can't relate to that being forced to learn a language. So I couldn't really comment on that. But I do think for me, I can only speak from that learning Irish from, like, I started learning when I was 14, so I wasn't particularly young either. And I didn't have it in the house. But I started learning from 14, and gradually I started to realize I was returning to something rather than picking up something new. That's how it felt to me, very personal. And anyone I talk to, like, I have a lot of friends of various ages, and there seems to be a generational gap there where my friends who would be older, their parents had Irish but never gave it to their kids because they thought there was no value to it. It was a poor man's language. And it seems now after that generational gap where we are now, where maybe the third generation of children there want to give Irish to their children as maybe a gift.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of political issues too around the Irish language that kind of compounded the issue as well for native speakers in Ireland that who didn't want to give it to pass it down to their children, because there are a lot of issues, I think, beyond the poor man's language. It definitely was considered a poor man's language, but there's so much political influence on it as well that I think that became difficult for people. Were afraid almost to pass the language down. They didn't know what the consequences would have been for their children. And they didn't want them to be prejudiced. That's the other side of it as well. And I think I've noticed there's a huge kind of effort towards speaking the language. The Department of Education has changed the system of the Leaving Cert so that 50% of the Leaving Cert paper is an oral now. So you have to be able to speak the language. And which is really going to help people, because people will speak it more often now. Then the teachers will have to dedicate time in class rather than perfection of the written language, that the teachers will have to put in the work to get people speaking the language in order to get those grades, those Leaving Cert grades. But I also notice, not alone is that helping, I have seen a number of social media platforms that use such as Gaelic Gaeilge, or a number of them, there's so many of them, that use snippets, like they would say a couple of words in Irish and it translated into English. And then they ask people to engage in it, and people are engaging. And it's like people who want to kind of engage cúpla focal, just the cúpla focal, that's all they want, just a cúpla focal. If you can say 2 words today and you add an extra word to that tomorrow and another word to that the following day, soon you'll be able to speak fluently again. You come back to the language. And I think those, you see them all over Facebook, Instagram, so on and so forth, and that they are bringing people back in because people can interact again with the language. I think they're being very powerful influences on the resurgence of the language as well. I think we were so gifted to have TG Cahir. It's been a fantastic gift to the people, because it's great to be able to watch documentaries or whatever you want to watch on TG Cahir, and they're excellent in Irish. It's great now that there's not just Radio na Gaeltacht, that is not the only Irish language radio station in the country. There's Radio na Litha. There are so many others. So that if you don't want to listen to certain types of music, you can have another radio station that has different music for a different audience, for a younger audience possibly, and again through the Irish language. On certain radio stations are even doing, who are English, mostly predominantly English language radio stations, are having sections at different times of the day for Irish language broadcasters. So it is a powerful thing that's happening, a powerful change that's happening in our language. How do you think it will progress, either of you? Do you think we will the number of speakers will increase, do you think? What do you think is going to come of the Irish language? Will it die or will it survive?
Well, I think it's a very broad question, and I think something to be very cautious about is tokenism towards language. I think a lot of you've got fluent speakers, you have Pobl na Gaeilge, you have Folamuori learners, and it's like we call it in Irish a co-phobal. It's a community of communities now, and it's almost like a spectrum. At one end you have the learner with cúpla focal, and at the other end you have the fluent speaker, the native speaker. And I think there's a lot of aims which need to be ironed out there and aligned. And I don't think tokenism serves the language very well. And that's not to discourage people, but what I mean by that is Pobl na Gaeilge is a culture. It's a culture. It's people. I would call myself a Gael. And it's not about but it's a community which deserves to be treated like a community and with respect. And I know this is a big issue at government level at the minute, because there's Bilitanga is coming in at the minute, or something that's been debated. But there's a lot of different needs between learners to native speakers, and they all need addressed somehow. I think it will survive, of course, but you have to keep the pressure on. Like, you have to keep the foot on the gas with it. It's not, you can't just reach a quota of speakers and be like, right, well, we'll just pause the funding for this, or we'll just pause the push for this. It's a living, breathing community of real people who live their lives through this language. And I think from all the people I've spoken to, it's always, oh, I loved Irish at school, I loved my cúpla focal, but nobody speaks it. And whereas I'm like, I speak it, you know.
And there's the issue. I suppose we need to broaden our communities. We need to broaden the Irish language community. You know, it's not good enough to say I'm in the Irish language community as a Gaeilge or as a fluent Irish language speaker. This is my community. You're just learners. You're separate to us. We have to have those learners as welcome them to expand the community. Otherwise, the language will be lost, because that community, that hardcore, like in terms of like that people were brought into language. I have several friends who were born into the language, you know what I mean, in Connemara. And, you know, the older generations are dying, the newer generations are emigrating, or are migrating to other areas of Ireland. They mightn't be handing the language down to the next generation. They might be living in Germany or France or Australia, and they mightn't be speaking it there. They mightn't be handing it down. And then that other community gets smaller and smaller unless the people who are trying to learn it, unless we bring them into those communities. I think we will be in trouble as a language. What do you think, Ross? What's your opinion on it?
I suppose my opinion is that I've always been interested in, you know, the question of who really owns the Irish language, because there's Anna-Clare said there are different communities, and it's like a spectrum. And my opinion, sorry, would very much echo hers in that yes, we do have to encourage people to speak the language, but at the same time, I think we need to ensure that we don't leave the
native speakers behind. Yeah.
Native speakers in the empathy behind.
That's
I
true.
think
Yeah.
just as
So
a
it's
final
that
point,
trying to find that balance. Sorry, Anna-Clare, what were you going to say?
just to kind of, as a final point in that, I feel like no learner should have to justify using Irish. If you love the language, that is your right to use it. It's your birthright to use it. That's my personal opinion. As long as you love it, that's reason enough to speak it.
And I think that's a really valuable point you've made, because people need to remember that, whether it's a cúpla focal, whether it's lífa, you know, whether they're fluent in the language, whether it's just that couple of words that they use, like that identifies them as being Irish. And because you meet a number of people and they'd say, they leave you, say goodbye, they say slán go fóill or slán, and they may not be fluent in Irish at all, but it's their identity that they're trying to identify with something that is culturally theirs, you know, a language. And I think what the point you made, Anna-Clare, is a really important point for Irish people to remember. So I want you to make the point one more time so that people who are listening to this podcast can remember this, people who are Irish and have grown up on this island. One more time, tell us what you said.
Just, if you love the Irish language, you don't need to justify that. That is your right to speak it. And it's your birthright to speak it.
And we need to remember that.
Yeah,
All Irish
sure.
people need to remember that. Yeah, Ross, you were going to say something.
It is it's yours.
Yeah, it's Latsai. Well, that's a lovely ending to actually to this podcast, because I don't think we're going to continue the podcast now, because you've ended it very well, Anna-Clare, and I don't want people to forget that, what you've just said. So I will say to everybody who's listening, go out there, use the language in whatever way you can, keep using it, keep embracing it. It's your right, it's your birthright. If you love the language, you don't have to justify to anybody why you're speaking it, just give it a go. And to all of you who are feeling you're lacking in confidence around the language, don't let that be the impediment to moving forward, to speaking it, to reading books in the Irish language. Do whatever works for you. Follow your interests and in the Irish language if you can. Thank you, Ross, for being here, Ross Coleman, and thank you, Anna-Clare and McGarvey, for being in here with us on our Script to Story podcast series, season 4. And I wish you every success in the future in and around the Irish language. Thank you.